Flossenburg, Grossrosen, Mauthausen. In 1940, the SS scheme had thousands of men working in the quarries at all these camps. But that still wasn't enough to supply the Reich. Especially since in the summer of 1940, what Hitler's architect really wanted was granite.
What they wanted was prestigious constructions, constructions that would last. So granite was the best thing for that.
So Himmler asked one of the geologists to find him some granite quarries in Alsace. Ones that would be in places where they'd be able to build concentration camps nearby. The geologist started searching around and found what he was looking for. In the commune of Natzweiler, up on Mount Louise. A vein of granite. But not just any granite, pink granite.
He immediately realized that the Nazis would be very interested in this, so he got straight in touch with his bosses to tell them what he'd found.
What's more, not even a kilometer away, there was a farm, an inn, and some outbuildings. A place called the Struthof.
It was a place they really loved in Strasbourg, the middle-class elite who liked their sports. It was where you went to have fun with your family, or for the lovely view, or to have a nice glass of Alsace wine at the inn.
In 1940, the Struthof was a little paradise in winter for people who wanted to ski or go sledding. In summer, it was an ideal spot for rambles. There was even a nice villa with a pool. But this peaceful resort was about to become an outpost of hell. Because for the SS, it was the perfect place for a concentration camp. The inn was ideal for the guards and the officers. The outbuildings could hold the first prisoners who'd build the projected camp out on the pastures. But it had other advantages too.
Down below was the direct railway line to the city of Strasbourg, so they could get their supplies in. It also meant they could bring in all the manpower that they needed. But of course, there was another reason: the relative secrecy of the place. It was nicely tucked away.
The SS quickly gave it the green light.
There were meetings with all the municipalities at Natzweiler, at Rotho, etc. The mayors were there, the mayors chosen by the Nazis, to hand over the land and to organize setting up the camp.
This letter shows all the deals that were made. It's dated the 14th of September, 1940, and is entitled The Granite of Vosges. The SS on-site representative informs Berlin that he has negotiated with the mayor of Natzweiler, who is ready to accept an offer for the occupation of this zone. An agreement could thus be reached for the SS enterprise to rent or buy the land. In the village, nobody was really in a position to stand up to the region's new master. In March 1941, Himmler officially decided to open a concentration camp on this land annexed from France. His objective? To send political opponents and resistors there. Not to reform them, to work them to death. And he gave it a name, KL Natzweiler-Struthof. So the order was given to the SS to hurry men to Alsace. Among the first to arrive there in the spring of 1941 was a certain Joseph Kramer.
He was a big man, very manly looking, dark-haired, with this big square chin, and you could see he was someone who was physically very sure of himself.
An admirer of Hitler and fanatic about Himmler, he'd been recruited to the SS in 1932. He'd been out of work at the time, unable to provide for his family, a situation the Reich was good at exploiting.
The Nazis were very cunning, because obviously if you give a job to someone who otherwise would be rather lost, that person will be all the more motivated.
He felt like a real man at last because, at last, he had a framework. He had the impression he was useful, and suddenly his life had a name to it.
Dachau, Mauthausen, Auschwitz. Kramer passed through a lot of camps and was trained by some fearsome SS chiefs.
When Kramer got to Natzweiler, he already had years of experience of the concentration camps behind him. And he was going to make his mark on this one.
For over a year and a half, he would oversee the laying of roads and the construction of the camp. Little by little, the camp took shape. Upstairs at the inn became the offices, the pleasant main house, the commandant's quarters, and on the ancient pastures, they built terraces to break the slope. And on each of those terraces, they built a block, one of them a prison, another a cremation oven. All around, a double row of electrified barbed wire fences 3 meters high. The whole of it surveyed by 8 watchtowers with views designed for perfect aim. Finally, a few barracks were built for the guards along the road leading up to the camp. In 1942, the whole area for kilometers around was made a restricted zone.
So the whole area was restricted to prevent anyone finding out just what a concentration camp really was.
Anyone who entered this restricted zone would be under threat of death, and everybody knew it.
At the head of his little concentration camp empire, Kramer made sure the arriving deportees got the message straight away.
The commandant, he was a right bastard, Joseph Kramer.
Ernst Sillem is 94. He's one of the 2 last Dutch survivors of Struthof. He spent 14 months there. When he arrived at the Roto train station just below the camp, a conversation he heard between the commandant and a guard left him in no doubt.
The first chap said, "There's one of them we really have to get rid of." And the other replied, "Don't worry, they're all going to be done in."
In another convoy, this one from Paris, was Jean Villeray. An equally frightening welcome awaited this 19-year-old member of the resistance.
As soon as we stepped out, all the yelling and the orders began. Schnell and all that. I didn't even know what it meant.
In the village, all the shutters were closed.
On the way up, I saw a woman crossing herself and another one crying. I was thinking, well, it's certainly not a holiday camp here, that's for sure.
The majority of the detainees were political opponents or young resistance members from all over Europe. They didn't know where they were or what was going to happen to them. But the men, or rather the phantoms, that they saw as they approached the camp chilled them. You can see it in this drawing one deportee did when the guards weren't looking.
That came as a very serious shock to them, because they understood that those people were the image of what they'd be in a few months, or at any rate what the SS wanted them to be.
I never knew, never even imagined you could treat human beings that way.
Within hours, the deportees would be thrown into the total inhumanity that Kramer and his subordinates were orchestrating. The first big shock came right there at the entrance. They were all required to strip naked. The Nazis scrupulously noted down all their belongings to make them believe they might one day be able to leave.
Then they shaved you completely from head to toe. Not a single hair left. Then they take you into the next room, the shower room.
It all happened very quickly. As the minutes went by, it got more and more difficult to differentiate between all these naked bodies. And that was just what the Nazis wanted.
The ritual that the SS had come up with was really designed to break these people who'd been lawyers, tradesmen, citizens. It meant the SS weren't dealing with individuals anymore, just a mass.
To make that mass even more anonymous, the SS made the new arrivals all put on a striped uniform or old mismatched clothes. These would be their only protection against the cold.
They gave us clothes. You had to stand on tiptoe if you wanted to get big enough sizes that weren't too small for you. You just had to wear what you were given.
And finally, they gave everyone a number. 74 years later, Jean Villeray still remembers his.
I'm number 19410. These are things that you don't forget. It's a terrifying moment, being given a number. From that moment on, you were no longer a man, you were what they called a Stück.
A Stück, just a thing. Joseph Kramer wasn't the only one running this great grinding machine. He'd handpicked the most servile SS henchmen to do his dirty work.
These were men with no scruples. They were inhuman. They were bastards to everyone. They didn't know how to be good or kind. They didn't know the meaning of kindness.
Particularly Wolfgang Süß. The prisoners all called him the Creature. He was at the very heart of all the terror. There, cut off from the outside world, he could give free rein to his sadism.
People have testified to scenes of unimaginable brutality. People beaten to death, savaged by dogs, lying in puddles as guards urinated on them. Just atrocious things.
Torture was something where physical abuse was considered entirely normal to get people to obey.
As well as the SS, deportees had the capos to deal with too. Prisoners who'd been promoted to oversee and keep an eye on their fellow inmates, and who had the power of life and death over them. Kramer had chosen them from among the first arrivals. It was a particularly cruel system.
This capos system was incredibly perverse, but very representative of the Nazi way of thinking. Because by turning some of the deportees into SS collaborators, they effectively turned them into torturers.
Torturers who made survival at the camp completely arbitrary, day after day, and night after night. For at Struthof, the days were an unbroken chain of suffering with one sole objective: to break both body and soul.